Imagine a world where wars are not decided by generals, but by interest rates. Where empires rise not because of armies, but because one family quietly decides who receives credit and who doesn't. Now imagine this. A single message, carried by a lone rider across the English Channel in 1815, triggers one of the deepest financial manipulations in European history, and most people never even realized it happened. This isn't fiction. It's the origin myth and the warning behind the most controversial dynasty in financial history. For over 2 centuries, one name has drifted like a whisper through the world of global finance, wrapped in secrecy, power, and myth: the Rothschilds. Some people see them as the architects of modern banking. Others see them as the invisible hand behind wars, economies, and the quiet machinery of global power. But here's the real question. How did one family, starting from a single cramped house in Frankfurt's Jewish ghetto, build a financial network so vast that governments became dependent on them? And why does their influence still echo in modern central banking, global debt structures, and the very idea of the international economy? This is not a story about conspiracy. It's a story about systems, how wealth concentrates, how information becomes power, and how finance shapes history far more than any throne or parliament ever could. Because hidden behind the rise of nations is a darker truth. Money doesn't flow freely. It flows through gates. And every gate has a gatekeeper. The Rothschilds didn't just open those gates. They helped build the entire financial architecture we now live under, an architecture that rewards speed, secrecy, and scale. But this system, like all systems, was born from desperation. To understand how the Rothschilds changed the world forever, you have to go back to the moment Europe was drowning in debt, when kings needed loans just to survive, and when a clever, sharp-eyed merchant named Mayer Amschel Rothschild realized something that would rewrite financial history. The most powerful currency in the world is trust. And trust, once weaponized, becomes control. But how did a family of outsider bankers learn to control the flow of international capital? How did they build a network that functioned like the first global internet of finance, faster than couriers, faster than governments, faster than news itself? The answer begins in a modest coin shop, in a city willing to ignore a rising empire forming right under its nose. Yet the deeper truth is this. Everything the Rothschilds built, the rapid information networks, cross-border lending, sovereign debt markets, forms the backbone of the modern global economy. Central banks, bond markets, international finance, they all trace roots back to this family's innovations. So the question we must explore isn't, were they powerful? It's something far more unsettling. Did the Rothschilds merely profit from history? Or did they quietly shape its direction? And if one family could do that in the 1800, what does that say about our world today? A world ruled by networks, speed, and money systems we no longer fully understand. The answer lies in the past. In a dynasty built not on gold, but on information. It began in Frankfurt, in a narrow alley of the Jewish ghetto, a place of restrictions, taxes, and imposed poverty. But inside a humble house marked with a red shield, Rothschild, Mayer Amschel Rothschild was quietly building something entirely different. While other merchants traded goods, he traded relationships. Princes, dukes, aristocrats, Mayer understood that those who held power always needed one thing: credit. Europe in the late 1700s was a continent addicted to debt. Wars were expensive. Empires required constant financing. And traditional lenders, local banks and royal treasuries, couldn't keep up. Mayer saw opportunity in instability. Every empire in history has been built on money, but few understood the mechanics of credit like he did. His genius wasn't in wealth, but in strategy. Instead of keeping his 5 sons close, he sent each one to a different capital of Europe. Amschel stayed in Frankfurt. Nathan went to London. James built in Paris. Karl took Vienna. Salomon established in Naples. 5 brothers, 5 cities, 1 network. What he built wasn't a family business. It was the world's first international financial intelligence system. Information traveled between them faster than official channels. They used coded letters, private couriers, and even carrier pigeons. In a world before telegraphs, the Rothschilds were operating a real-time data network. And whoever controlled information controlled markets. The turning point, 1815. Europe was on the brink. Napoleon had escaped exile, armies were marching, and sovereign debt markets were trembling. Every government was desperate for financing. Enter Nathan Rothschild, the most ruthless and brilliant of the brothers. Operating from London, the financial heart of Europe, Nathan understood something the British government did not. Victory requires more than soldiers, it requires liquidity. So he did something unprecedented. He financed the British war effort at a scale no private banker had ever attempted. Not because he loved Britain, but because war was predictable chaos. Chaos creates volatility. Volatility creates profit. And then came the moment that turned the Rothschilds from wealthy bankers into legends. The Waterloo myth and the real power behind it. The story often told is that after the Battle of Waterloo, Nathan received news of Napoleon's defeat before anyone else in London. He supposedly manipulated the stock market by selling government bonds, creating panic, then buying everything back for pennies. Whether this exact story is myth or truth misses the point. What is true is more important. Nathan Rothschild did receive information faster than markets. He did have a private intelligence network more efficient than any government. And he did use volatility to leverage control over the British bond market, the backbone of the British Empire. This was the moment sovereign debt became the real battleground of Europe. From then on, governments didn't just borrow from the Rothschilds. They depended on them. Building the system, the Rothschild model. The family perfected a system still used in modern finance. International arbitrage, rapid information flow, cross-border capital movement, bond underwriting for governments, risk spreading across countries, technologically driven speed advantage. By the mid-1800s, the Rothschilds had more liquidity than most European treasuries. Kings consulted them. Prime ministers courted them. Wars shifted based on their decisions. Their power wasn't loud. It was infrastructural. They didn't rule nations. They ruled the money system those nations relied on. And as railroads emerged, the 19th century version of the internet, the Rothschilds controlled financing for nearly all of it. The lines of steel that stretched across Europe weren't just transportation routes. They were pipelines of influence. But power shifts and history moves forward. The world the Rothschilds built didn't stay exclusive to them. Their innovations, global information networks, decentralized banking branches, sovereign bond markets, became templates for the financial world. Central banks, IMF-style lending, international banking families, modern investment banking, transnational debt systems. The Rothschild model became the foundation of global finance. But with imitation came dilution. As the 20th century arrived, American capital began rising. New York eclipsed London. Governments centralized monetary policy through central banks. And new institutions, the Federal Reserve, the Bank for International Settlements, absorbed the systems the Rothschilds pioneered. The family didn't disappear. Their wealth diversified. Their influence became quieter, more discreet, more corporate than dynastic. But their fingerprints remained on the architecture of the global economy itself. And this brings us to the true climax of their story, not conspiracy, but systemic legacy. Here is the truth hidden behind centuries of myth. The Rothschilds didn't control the world. They controlled something far more powerful, the structure of how the world finances itself. They built the first financial network, the first real-time information system, the first global banking dynasty, the first scalable model of sovereign debt financing. And once a system is built, it outlives its creators. The modern world, our economy, our markets, our credit cycles, all operate on mechanisms first perfected by this family. When nations need money, they issue bonds. When markets panic, liquidity becomes power. When information travels faster than governments, financial actors win. This is the Rothschild legacy, not domination but design. A world where money flows through networks instead of borders, where trust is monetized, where debt becomes the backbone of power, where private influence can shape public destiny. We live in a world built on their blueprint. And that leads us to the final, unsettling realization. History didn't repeat. It scaled. The power once held by a few families is now held by institutions, global banks, central banks, hedge funds, sovereign wealth funds, multinational corporations. The system didn't disappear. It became bigger, more complex, less accountable. We like to think modern finance is democratic, transparent, regulated. But its foundations were built in shadows, in back rooms, coded letters, private meetings between governments and financiers. The Rothschilds were simply the first to master it. Today, others sit in those seats. Names change. Mechanisms don't. Because the ultimate lesson of this story is not about a dynasty. It's about the system that dynasty built. A system of debt, information, speed, and control. A system we live inside but didn't choose. A system we rarely question because we've forgotten it had an architect. In the end, the Rothschilds changed the world not through conspiracy, but through innovation. They professionalized global finance. They connected markets across continents. They made governments dependent on credit. They helped birth the modern economy. And the structure they left behind still determines how nations rise, how markets move, and how power flows. We think we are free of old dynasties, but we are not free of the systems they created. Because once a financial architecture becomes global, there is no going back. The world we live in, its debts, its empires, its crises, its illusions of stability, is a world built on ideas forged centuries ago. Quiet ideas, efficient ideas, powerful ideas, ideas that change the world forever. And the question we are left with now is this: if a single family could reshape the financial world in the 1800, who is reshaping it today? The answer is closer than we think.